Two young nuns walked into the forest on a quiet Sunday afternoon in 1981, and they simply disappeared. No screams, no witnesses, no bodies, only two bicycles, lying on their sides beside an old dirt road, wheels still slowly turning in the wind, as if their riders had vanished mid-motion. For 27 years, the village of Alders Hollow believed the two women were gone forever. Some blamed kidnappers passing through on the old trade road. Others whispered about a forgotten cult said to live somewhere in the hills above the tree line. Many, especially the old women who had grown up on stories passed down through generations, believed the forest itself had claimed them, the way it had claimed a handful of others over the decades. The police searched for weeks, then months, then quietly closed the file. The church held a memorial service. Two coffins, empty, were lowered into the ground beside the chapel, where both women had once knelt every morning to pray. The village mourned, and slowly, the way all villages do, it began to forget. Until one rainy evening, nearly 3 decades later, an elderly priest pried opened a hidden chamber beneath an abandoned chapel and found something no one expected. A discovery so disturbing that it would force investigators to reopen one of the region's oldest missing persons cases. What really happened to Sister Agnes and Sister Maria? Because the truth, when it finally surfaced, was far darker than anyone in Alders Hollow had ever dared to imagine. Alders Hollow was the kind of village where nothing was ever truly private. It sat in a shallow valley, ringed by wheat fields on one side and a dense, ancient forest on the other. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone attended the same small stone chapel on Sunday mornings, and everyone, in one way or another, owed something to the two young nuns who lived at the convent behind it. Sister Agnes was 31 years old, sharp-eyed, and endlessly patient. She taught the village children to read in a small schoolroom attached to the convent, and she had a gift for making even the most stubborn child feel capable of something. She was curious in a way the older clergy sometimes found unsettling. She asked questions about the parish's finances, about the land deals the church quietly brokered with local landowners, about why certain families in the village had grown wealthy while others had lost their farms. Sister Maria was younger, only 26, softer spoken, but no less formidable in her own way. She had trained as a nurse before taking her vows, and she was the one villagers called first when a child had a fever or an old man's cough would not clear. She had a quiet, unshakable faith, the kind that did not need to announce itself. Between the two women, there was a deep friendship, the sort that forms between people who see the world clearly and choose, together, to try to make it a little better. Everyone in the village admired them. But in the days before they disappeared, a few neighbors noticed something they would not speak of until decades later. Both women had seemed afraid. Mrs. Calloway, who ran the bakery, later admitted that Sister Agnes had come in one morning, ordered her bread as always, and then stood at the counter far longer than necessary, glancing at the door every few seconds, as though she expected someone to walk through it. When Mrs. Calloway asked if something was wrong, Sister Agnes only smiled and said, "Some things are better left in God's hands." At the time, it seemed like nothing. Looking back, it seemed like everything. What were the two women afraid of? No one asked, and by the time anyone thought to, it was already too late. The final Sunday began like any other. Morning Mass was held in the small stone chapel, and both sisters were seen kneeling in their usual places near the front. Afterward, they visited an elderly widower on the edge of the village, bringing him bread and checking on a wound on his leg that Sister Maria had been treating for weeks. They stopped by the schoolhouse to collect a stack of papers. By early afternoon, they were seen walking together toward the convent, deep in conversation. Then something changed. A young altar boy, delivering a message from the parish priest, later recalled handing Sister Agnes a folded piece of paper. He did not read it. He only remembered that her expression shifted the moment she opened it, the color leaving her face, her jaw tightening. She showed it to Sister Maria, and the two women exchanged a look the boy would remember for the rest of his life. Instead of returning to the convent, the sisters turned and walked toward the old mission road, a rutted path that led deep into the forest to an abandoned chapel that had not been used in years. No one knew why. It was not on their usual route. It served no purpose the villagers could imagine. A farmer working his field that evening later swore he heard the mission chapel's bell ring, faint and irregular, at an hour when no one should have been there to ring it. Another villager, a woodcutter named Elias Renner, claimed he saw a dark, unfamiliar vehicle parked near the edge of the forest, close to where the mission road began. When he reported it to police, they dismissed it as unreliable. Elias had a reputation for drinking, and no one took his account seriously. Years later, when he was an old man himself, Elias Renner would still insist, to anyone who asked, that he had been telling the truth all along. The two nuns were never seen again. By Monday morning, when neither sister appeared for prayers, the alarm went out across the entire village. Within hours, nearly every able-bodied person in Alders Hollow had joined the search. Police arrived from the nearest town. Search dogs were brought in. Volunteers formed lines and combed the forest floor inch by inch. Even a small unit of soldiers, stationed nearby for training exercises, joined the effort. For 9 days, the search continued. What they found only deepened the mystery. 2 bicycles, abandoned near the start of the mission road. A rosary, its string broken, its beads scattered in the dirt a few hundred yards further in. Torn pages from a prayer book, half buried in wet leaves. Tire tracks in the mud near the forest's edge, too faint to be cast, leading nowhere useful. And strangest of all, a set of footprints belonging to 2 people that simply stopped, mid-stride, on a stretch of open ground, as though the 2 women had been lifted straight into the air. No blood, no bodies, no ransom note, no suspects. The absence of evidence became its own kind of evidence, and the village filled the silence with fear. Neighbors began eyeing neighbors with suspicion. A traveling merchant who had passed through the week before was tracked down and questioned for hours before being released without charge. Parents forbade their children from setting foot near the tree line. Within a month, the forest that had once been a place for berry picking and quiet walks had become something the village crossed the road to avoid. But there was one detail investigators never released to the public. Buried in the case file, in a police report that would not resurface for nearly 30 years, was a note. A partial second set of footprints, adult-sized, found near where the Nuns' trail ended. Footprints belonging to someone whose identity was never determined. As the search dragged into its second week without answers, investigators turned their attention inward, toward the parish itself. They interviewed the church's groundskeeper, its caretakers, former altar boys, and the priest who had served alongside the 2 missing women. The groundskeeper, an elderly man named Joseph Braun, gave a series of statements that did not quite line up. In one interview, he claimed to have locked the mission chapel weeks earlier and never returned. In another, he mentioned, almost in passing, that he had gone there the very week the sisters disappeared to repair a section of fence, a detail he had not mentioned before. When pressed, he grew evasive and eventually refused to speak with police further. Around the same time, the parish's financial records for the previous 2 years went missing from the church office. Old registry files, land agreements, and correspondence simply could not be found. Someone, it seemed, was determined to erase a piece of the parish's history, though no one could say why or what exactly they were trying to hide. Father Thomas, the parish priest, appeared to investigators to be genuinely devastated. He had known both women for years, had ordained their vows himself, and he wept openly during the memorial service held for them months later. Few doubted his grief, and yet, years afterward, some villagers began to quietly question whether Father Thomas knew more than he had ever admitted. Not because of any hard evidence against him, but because of a single sentence he spoke during that memorial service, a sentence that struck the congregation as strange even at the time. Standing before the 2 empty coffins, his voice trembling, he had said, "May God forgive what was hidden in this house before their light was taken from us." No one asked him what he meant. Not that day, and not for 27 years. In the years that followed, Alders Hollow was never quite the same. Several families packed up and moved away entirely, unable to bear living so close to the forest where their daughters sisters, and friends had vanished. Those who remained began reporting strange occurrences that, true or not, took on a life of their own. Lights were seen flickering deep in the trees at night. On more than one occasion, the mission chapel's bell was heard ringing on its own, though the building had been sealed and abandoned for years. Anonymous letters occasionally arrived at the police station, vague and unsigned, hinting at knowledge no one could verify. One of the original investigators on the case requested early retirement less than 2 years after the search was called off, and he refused, for the rest of his life, to discuss the disappearance with anyone, including his own family. Another officer, when asked about it decades later at a retirement dinner, simply set down his drink and left the room. As the years passed, the disappearance slowly transformed from a tragedy into something closer to folklore. Children who had not yet been born in 1981 grew up hearing frightened, half-remembered versions of the story, some claiming the nuns had been taken by something not of this world, others insisting they had simply run away to start new lives elsewhere. Most people, by the late 1990s, had quietly accepted that the truth would never be known. But one person never accepted that. Father Thomas, though he aged and eventually stepped back from most of his parish duties, continued for years to ask questions no one wanted to answer. He wrote letters to retired officers. He kept his own private notes, and though he never said so publicly, those closest to him believed he suspected the answer to what happened had been hidden somewhere all along, closer than anyone had thought to look. 27 years after the disappearance, the old parish chapel, long neglected and structurally failing, was scheduled for emergency repairs. A construction crew arrived to reinforce the foundation, and in doing so, they uncovered something that had gone unnoticed for decades. A sealed underground passage beneath the chapel's eastern wall, its entrance hidden behind a false section of stone flooring. No one on the current parish staff had known it existed. Now an old man, Father Thomas insisted on inspecting the passage personally before anyone else went further. Against the objections of the younger clergy, he was lowered down into the narrow stone corridor with a single flashlight and a cane to steady himself. Inside, the air was thick with dust that had not been disturbed in nearly 30 years. He found small storage rooms filled with broken furniture, old candlestands, and crates of records no one had thought to preserve. Deeper in, he found a section of wall that did not match the rest of the passage. Newer stonework, roughly fitted, clearly built after the original structure. Behind those loose stones, he found a locked wooden chest. It took the crew nearly an hour to open it. What was inside left everyone present speechless. Personal belongings that had once belonged to Sister Agnes and Sister Maria, a hairpin, a small cross, a pair of reading glasses, a leather-bound diary, its pages swollen with age, several photographs faded but intact, an old parish ledger, filled with handwriting no one recognized, and at the very bottom a sealed envelope, yellowed with time, on which someone had written, in trembling ink, "If anyone finds this, tell the truth." Father Thomas sat alone in that hidden room for a long time before he allowed anyone to take the chest away. When investigators, now a new generation of detectives working alongside a cold case unit, finally read through Sister Agnes's diary, the entire understanding of the disappearance changed. The diary revealed that in the months before they vanished, the two women had uncovered something they were never meant to see. Sister Agnes, in her role helping manage parish records, had noticed irregularities in a series of land transfers involving local farmland. Property quietly signed away by struggling families under terms that made little sense, always benefiting the same small circle of powerful figures in the region. She had begun keeping notes. Sister Maria, through her work caring for the sick and elderly, had heard whispered complaints from villagers who felt they had been pressured, even threatened, into giving up land they had owned for generations. Together, the two women had begun quietly building a record of what they believed was a pattern of forgery and coercion, hidden for years behind the trusted name of the church itself. The diary described conversations they had, sources they spoke with, and a growing fear that they were being watched. The final entries grew shorter, more urgent. One passage described a warning delivered to Sister Agnes by someone she trusted, telling her to stop asking questions. Another described a locked drawer in the parish office that had mysteriously been left open, its contents disturbed, as though someone had been searching for the very notes she had been keeping. The last entry in the diary, dated the morning of the day they disappeared, ended abruptly, the handwriting hurried and uneven. "We are not alone," it read. Nothing followed. Armed with the diary and the sealed envelope, investigators formally reopened the case for the first time in 27 years. Forensic teams returned to the forest and the surrounding land. Ground-penetrating radar was used to scan areas near the old mission road that had never been thoroughly examined in 1981, when the technology simply did not exist. Elderly witnesses, many of whom had stayed silent for decades out of fear or simple resignation, finally came forward. Elias Renner, the woodcutter once dismissed as unreliable, gave a detailed new statement about the vehicle he had seen that night, adding details he said he had been too frightened to share before. Joseph Braun, the former groundskeeper, now in his final years, admitted under questioning that he had, in fact, been present near the mission chapel the week the sisters vanished, though he continued to deny knowing what had happened to them. Preserved physical evidence from the original 1981 search, including fragments of clothing collected but never fully analyzed, was resubmitted for modern forensic testing. Several long-respected figures in the community, descendants of the families named in the land disputes described in the diary, became persons of interest for the first time. Long-hidden parish and property documents, some recovered from the same hidden chamber, exposed years of falsified signatures and deliberately buried records. Yet even with all of this new information, one central question remained unanswered. If the diary was telling the truth, and the two women had been silenced to protect a hidden scheme of corruption, then where were their bodies? 27 years of searching, and the forest still had not given them up. The final breakthrough came almost by accident. While reviewing old property maps recovered from the parish office, investigators noticed a small, long-forgotten well near the abandoned mission chapel, one that did not appear on any modern survey and had been filled in and covered decades earlier. Excavation began carefully under the supervision of forensic specialists. Layer by layer, workers cleared away decades of packed earth and debris. What they recovered there finally gave the case the answer it had been missing for nearly 3 decades. Physical evidence conclusively linking both women to that location, evidence that had remained undisturbed since 1981. The findings, combined with the diary, the falsified land records, and the new witness testimony, allowed investigators to conclude what the village had feared and denied for a generation. Sister Agnes and Sister Maria had not run away. They had not been taken by anything supernatural, nor lost to the forest by accident. They had uncovered the truth about a corrupt scheme that threatened powerful interests in their community, and for that, their lives had been taken from them, and their disappearance had been covered up by more than one person working together to protect that secret. The case did not resolve every remaining question. Not everyone involved could still be held accountable after so many years, and some of those responsible had already died carrying their silence with them. But the truth, buried for 27 years beneath stone and soil, had finally been brought into the light. Today, the old mission chapel still stands at the edge of the forest outside Alders Hollow, its walls weathered, its bells silent. It has become, for the village, a quiet reminder of how long the truth can wait and how much can be lost while it does. For the families of Sister Agnes and Sister Maria, the discovery brought something they had waited a lifetime for. Not justice in its fullest sense, but finally an answer. And while an answer could never replace the years or the lives that were taken, it gave them something they had not had in 27 years, the ability to grieve without wondering. Cases like this are a reminder that time does not erase the truth. Sometimes it simply waits patiently for the right person to look in the right place. What do you think? Could this case have been solved much sooner? If those early clues, the witness accounts, the strange behavior in the days before the sisters vanished, had been taken seriously from the start? If stories like this stay with you, the kind of forgotten cases where the smallest overlooked detail changes everything, consider following for more.